Thank you for being here bright and early to energize your day, to talk about the Energy Conference. I want to thank our partner, National Grid, for making this event possible. My name is Josh Schneps. I'm the CEO of Schneps Media. We publish many of the local media outlets here in New York City, including QNS.com, the Queen's Courier, the Times Ledger, Caribbean Life, Noticia NYC, and many of the other media outlets that we have listed here. So it really is a pleasure to host this event, to give information on the latest that's happening in this industry, which touches every single one of our lives. We have a great group of panelists. I want to thank all of them for taking the time to be here this morning, and thank each one of you. If you could please put your phones on silent, just out of respect to the speakers, as well as we are recording this event, so after the fact, look out for your picture on QNS.com and AMNY.com. We're going to be sharing the video of the event as well. I do want to recognize that today is Eid Mubarak, which I want to wish everyone, is anyone celebrating here, a happy and a healthy one. It is the end of Ramadan, so I just want to recognize that. And again, thank you all for being here. We are waiting for Councilmember Palladino to join us, but in the meantime, I'd love to call up our keynote this morning, Will Haslip from National Grid.
Josh, thank you very much. I was reflecting, I think this is my fourth Schneps Energy Conference, so it's such a great event. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm extremely excited to be here and appreciate the opportunity to have a little discussion with you all. As I said, it's great to be in Queens today at the New York Energy Conference. Thank you, Schneps, Queens Chamber of Commerce, and the other sponsors for bringing together business and community leaders from the region to find solutions to ensure affordability in the clean energy future. There are many familiar faces in the room this morning, including friends and colleagues with whom I work on projects that are delivering the state's clean energy targets. Today, these experts will cover topics on innovation and investment to achieve these goals. With every passing year, the need for climate action becomes more urgent. We are seeing an increasing amount of severe weather, which is a reminder to all of us that we need to plan and put the infrastructure in place now for a cleaner energy system of tomorrow. In the past year, we at National Grid Ventures have made significant progress toward New York's clean energy targets. We've done this by developing and operating U.S. clean power infrastructure through a number of technologies like offshore wind, solar, and battery storage, and also modernizing electric transmission to carry that clean energy to more homes and businesses throughout the state. Let me tell you what's happened in the last year. Last October, Governor Kathy Hochul announced that Community Offshore Wind, which is our joint venture with RWE, received a provisional award from NYSERDA to develop and deliver 1.3 gigawatts of offshore wind to the state of New York. Now that's enough renewable energy to power at least 500,000 homes and reduce emissions from New York's electric system by up to 5% during that first phase. Community Offshore Wind is also actively developing another 1.3 gigawatts, which could deliver a total of 2.6 gigawatts of offshore wind to New York. But we aren't delivering just clean energy. From our provisionally awarded project, we will create 800 new, good-paying jobs and invest in the services workers need to access these jobs. We will also commit more than $500 million to disadvantaged communities over the project lifetime. And that's alongside a $41 million package of workforce and economic development programs, which are designed hand in hand with local community leaders and organizations to build the clean energy workforce of tomorrow. In partnership with the United Way, the joint venture will invest $10 million in reduced cost childcare services for all offshore wind workers and trainees in New York, even those not working for Community Offshore Wind. We're also working with the YMCA to offer swim lessons to kids from disadvantaged communities throughout New York, because swimming is a prerequisite for jobs offshore. We've invested in summer employment and after-school programs for students from disadvantaged communities in New York geared toward providing technical skills needed for future offshore wind careers. One example is a New York City-based program that gives students a chance to learn about maritime and offshore wind careers in the classroom and then out on the water during field trips. Also in the last year, our joint venture, New York Transco, and partner, the New York Power Authority, received the go-ahead to develop Propel New York Energy. That's a 90-mile electric transmission project that will modernize and upgrade the electric network on Long Island to improve reliability and resiliency and allow the system to deliver more energy from Long Island to Westchester County and New York City. New York Transco, which is owned by the investor-owned utilities in New York, focuses on developing the large regional electric transmission that is necessary to make the energy transition happen. Also in the last year, New York Transco energized the New York Energy Solution Electric Transmission Modernization Project, which is a 55-mile stretch in upstate New York, carrying clean energy to homes and businesses in the Capital Region, the Hudson Valley, and beyond. Out on Long Island, last year, we celebrated the one-year anniversary of our project called Calverton Solar Energy Center with our partner, NextAir Energy Resources. The Calverton Solar Energy Center is a 23-megawatt project that powers more than 4,000 homes on Long Island. Since the start of operations in 2022, the project has reduced more than 20,000 tons of carbon emissions. That's the equivalent of removing 4,000 cars from the road. Finally, we continue to research and find solutions for how to utilize clean hydrogen. Long Island electric generation facilities are at the center of NGV's research efforts to deploy emerging clean energy technologies like clean hydrogen. Today, we operate oil and gas fueled power plants, which have been vital for providing communities with reliable energy for decades. In the future, we'll need to be able to produce power from a clean fuel, like hydrogen. And we're at the forefront of researching how to make clean fuel for power generation a reality. In fact, at our Port Jefferson facility, we are exploring the production, storage, and use of hydrogen for new power generation. As you can see, we made good progress in the past year, but we aren't done, and we recognize the hard work we have ahead to make the energy transition a reality for New York communities. I'm optimistic that with the people in this room, other energy leaders in New York, and the right supportive policies in place, we can tackle that hard work. And in the process, New York has an opportunity to become an environmental haven for residents. Building a sustainable, affordable future for all is the driving force behind our clean energy projects, which is what National Grid Ventures will continue to do. And we will work alongside community leaders to make sure we are providing benefits to every community we serve. The New York Energy Conference provides a forum for conversation, collaboration, and ultimately action. We are all here for the same reason, which is to provide affordable solutions to reach New York State's clean energy targets. This can be achieved only by working together. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to seeing what we can do together to bring a sustainable future for all. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Will. I want to welcome Councilmember Vicky Palladino. Thank you for being here this morning. If you want to work your way up to the stage, I know you have some remarks for us. I also want to make sure to thank the Queens Chamber of Commerce. Tom Gretsch is here. He's going to be on our first panel, who are our partner this evening. This is their home, where they have their home base.
Good morning, everybody. How are you? I'm Councilwoman Vicky Palladino, and I represent District 19, which is in Northeast Queens. This morning I'm here, and I'm going to share some views with you that may seem contrary to what we have sadly accepted as conventional wisdom here in New York. My role is to represent my constituents and the people of New York, not to carry water for an agenda that is obviously going to do a great deal of harm. Local Law 97 is a component of a carbon cap and trade that has always been a little bit more than a scam built on a lie. No other way to put it. This will do nothing more than to drive up costs of construction, energy, and goods across every aspect of life in New York. It will drastically limit access to those who can afford to do business in this city, as well as those who can afford to live here. Local Law 97 is a bad policy. Unfortunately, in my current role, I can't do much to entirely stop Local Law 97 or on a larger political agenda, which animates it, but upon taking office, I did what I thought was possible, and that was to try to be blunt and to carry the message of what Local Law 97 is going to do to my middle-class condo and co-op owners. They live in older buildings. These residents are facing financial disaster as their buildings fail to meet the strict arbitrary efficiency targets the law has established. The lack of resources to invest millions of dollars to make the necessary upgrades. Ironically, in many cases, these upgrades would actually be downgrades because the new electric heating cooling systems do not perform nearly as well as the systems that we already have in place. Many of these residents are elderly retirees on a fixed income. I spent a great deal of time meeting with these people and understanding their situation. I took this up back in 2021. This was passed in 2019. Their homes represent a very large majority of what we call true affordable housing, garden apartments, co-ops, and condos. Back in the day, you were able to purchase a condo for $50,000, $60,000, $80,000. We are faced with electrical bills for homeowners as well. We have seen them go up from $200 to $300 a month to $1,000 a month and better. I deal with this every single day. We got the message out. I worked with PCCC for the last year and a half to 2 years. I did town halls that filled a room with 400 people in it because people are scared stiff. Our energy grid at this time cannot sustain what is being forced down the throats of the people of New York and especially my constituents. In District 19 and District 20, we have the largest co-op and condos community in the entire city of New York. This now, what I plan to do here today, is to actually talk about and to discuss how we are going to increase power generation, upgrade grid capacity, which is key, implement electrification mandates. We did, in my opinion, all of this backwards. When we began mandating electrification buildings, additional generation capacity, or upgrading our grid. And so our prices are exploding, and we are going to be facing shortages. Politicians love these mandates, but hate doing the work of trying to make them feasible. It is much easier to just mandate something than to imagine its consequences, much less solve them. We are really suffering right now. Local Law 97 was passed in a very different economic climate that we are in today. It's widely irresponsible to expect people to endure these increased financial pressures with all the economic chaos that is currently happening today. So I will speak here today, and we will go back and forth and have, I hope, a very, very lively discussion. There are two sides of this. New York City, once again, is putting the cart before the horse. Make no mistake, these electric heating systems do not work if you live in a very cold climate. Imagine running your air conditioner all summer long and getting hit with a bill. How many here have seen their electric bill skyrocket in the last month and a half? Okay? My own electric bill went from $400 to $600 a month to $1,100 a month for 4 rooms. People are not living in my house anymore. It's me, my husband, and 1 son who are never home. I tried, and I spoke with Con Edison on behalf of my constituents who have come in to my office over the last year and a half because they were asked and instructed to install what they call smart meters. Well, these smart meters don't work. They're not very smart. Because how in the heck did we come up with these bills that these people have gotten $23, $24, and over $3,000 a month to catch up with the last 2 years? It has become absolutely unaffordable. We are forcing out the middle class here. When people have to stop and think about whether I buy food for my table or pay my electric bill, that's a problem. When we have young people who are faced with a mortgage, and then on top of that mortgage and maintenance fees that are going to skyrocket, this is a problem. They are leaving New York. Make no mistake. And New York City is the core of it all. This was passed by the City Council in 2019. Like I said, I've held town halls. I brought it to the people. I made the people aware of what was going on. The people did not even know what Local Law 97 was and the details that are attached to Local Law 97. My job as a city councilwoman is to make my constituents aware of what was passed in 2019. And up until recently, so many people are still unaware. I look forward, like I said, there are alternatives. We need to think about it. We don't need to jam it down people's throats. This has got to be thought out. My legislation that I put in last year, which has now been renumbered, number 58 and 59, it was 913 was the first one. What I asked for was simple, and I worked with PCCC together on this very simple legislation. It was to just keep a rolling, so that it didn't happen in 2019. So we would roll it out slowly over 7 years, and then another 7 years, so that these co-op and condo owners can deal with these fines that amount to millions and millions of dollars per condo unit. We are facing right now in 2019, in 2023, January, we are now facing $250 million in fines. Every co-op and condo owner. By the year 2030, we are looking down a barrel of a gun of $930 million. That's almost $1 billion in fines if co-ops and condos do not live up to these ridiculous expectations that they have placed on these people. So again, thank you very much. I know we may have our agreements and our disagreements, but that's what we're here for. We're here to discuss. So thank you very much, everybody.
Well, I want to thank each of the 3 of you for joining. And why don't we just start off by briefly introducing yourselves?
Good morning, everybody. Josh, thanks a million, and your team from Schneps for coming to the global headquarters of the Queens Chamber of Commerce. We love this building. It's a historic place, and we've been here since 1990. But again, the Queens Chamber of Commerce has been around since 1911. I'll have a chance to talk more about it, but just for the introduction purposes, thank you and welcome to Queens and the Queens Chamber of Commerce headquarters.
My name is Henry Wan. Most of you know me because of my Dragon Boat Association, but for this purpose, actually, I'm trying to reflecting the opinion of the Queens Bronx Builder Association, as well as the New York State Builders Association in terms of the local law 97 and its compliance.
Hi, I'm Aaron Kurlander. I'm Director of Economic Development, Chief Lending Officer, Greater Jamaica Development Corporation. We're a 57-year-old community building organization based in Jamaica, Queens. We plan, promote, and coordinate a better Jamaica, and we hope to help strengthen the region. And I'm here representing the Business Services Group, which works with local businesses.
Terrific. Well, thank you again each for your time. Tom, we'll start with you. We'll talk about Local Law 97. You're working with thousands of businesses here in Queens. Why don't you talk a little bit about how you, as the Chamber of Commerce, are supporting those businesses to achieve the requirements, really, that are needed?
So, Councilmember Palladino's tough act to follow when it comes to some of her comments about this, and we understand a lot about that. I do think that it's a noble cause, but sometimes those intentions can sometimes get caught up with a lack of pure discussion on cost. It is a different time since 2019. The Queens Chamber has an Energy and Environmental Committee that has embraced the law for what it is and try to find ways to help people save money to become in compliance. The fine situation, the penalty situation, to me is untenable. But at the end of the day, I think the most important part about it is to use resources from great players like, frankly, National Grid, who of course is a sponsor of this event, but also Con Ed, NYSERDA, U.S. Department of Energy, other resources to get what we have to get to without going broke in the process.
Henry, we
Okay.
talked about how you build affordable housing.
All right,
So-
so actually, local law 97 is a huge deal for us because we are directly impacted by the law. I'm a very active member of the Queens Bronx Builder Association as well as the New York State Builder Association. So this is hot topics for the last, I would say, few years already. And we do basically come into a consent about how we look at this whole things. Obviously, we will support the clean energy. I mean, there's no reason why not. But having said that, I mean, that's issues, okay? Number one, cost. Cost is issue for us because according to the estimate from New York State Builder Association, to comply completely or properly with the local law 97, you may increase the cost by about 5%. Now we say, 5% is not a lot, but it is a lot, for affordable housing. The affordable housing builder actually working on very low margins and high volume business. So anything that increased by 5%, we have to basically, pass on to the buyer, and that would cut back on the productions and cut back on the affordability. It's a huge issue. And also that people say that how is that the impacting the productions. Don't forget the trade people also have to adjust to it. We have to build in a higher low capacity for electrical system to handle the basically heat pump is the tool that we use to comply with the local law 97, and obviously the pumping system would change because rather than transporting water on the heat pump, now you have the refrigerants which have to be very carefully handled. Also, in terms of heat pumps, heat pump is great. People say energy, we agree, but let's look at it more detailedly. Heat pump work very well before above 40 degree. Anything below 40 degree, the efficiency drops. And if below freezing, you probably would need a special equipment in order to handle it for a long duration of time. And heat pump also have another issue is, it does not supply the hot water in the peak area. So in order to compensate for all those shortcomings, you probably have to have some backup system. Now that's come the extra cost. Also, we are very concerned about the reliability of the electric grid, okay? Let me just bring you to attention to a report by New York Independent System Operator, which basically, is the one who regulates the electric grid. In their 2023 short-term assessment of reliability, what we call a STAR report. Basically, we found that through updates of our analyst margins in New York City disappear altogether in the summer of 2025, meaning that the power generations and the demand use have changed. Okay, and they said this will require us to declare a reliability need in order to avoid outage and disruption to New York power supply. Now, this report is being done on 2023. You all have known about the explosion of the discussion on AI and power center. The demand of energy is enormous, and if we think that the situation will be bad on 2025 based on the 2023 report. Just think about how much more electric we would need, with all the new requirement for the AI and the data center. So that is really a major concern, and how reliable is the grid. And if the grid is not reliable, then come to the issue of, okay, so if the grid is reliable, so what do we do? Of course, one item to resolve the issue is to build more storage, the battery storage system. Now, those are very, very, very extreme expensive. And also right now, the capacity for long-term storage is extremely expensive, and also take up a lot of space. So those are issues that would we think that we need to resolve before we can go into full compliance of the local law 97.
So as Aaron mentioned, he is with the Greater Jamaica Development Corporation. And why don't you talk through how you're working with businesses to help them both understand what's required for the new local law 97?
Sure. So we're, Greater Jamaica has a business services group. We work directly with local businesses, mom and pop businesses primarily. We see our role in sort of three ways. One is education, and we work to educate businesses about the changing rules and regulations, the requirements, their timing, and such. We do that both at the local level and at city level, working with other organizations, just helping get people out to events, get people to seminars, get people the information in front of them, from a business owner's standpoint of what it's going to take to comply. And then there's the advocacy piece. We help advocate for local businesses. We hear from them. We sort of bring those messages to local elected officials, to state elected officials, sort of to understand what the local business community is feeling. And then on a third level, some of these things are happening. Businesses have to plan, and we help them finance those purchases. In our community, a lot of mom and pops have trouble getting financing. We have a CDFI loan fund, stands for Community Development Financial Institution, and we help structure loan products that could help make those improvements, and help we'll structure a loan to help sort of coincide with the anticipated energy savings that some of those changes would come with.
What would you say are some of the biggest questions and or challenges that you're hearing from these small businesses?
I think a lot of it is about predictability. A lot of it is a lot of the people are still not knowledgeable about the fact that these things are happening. Businesses want predictability. They want to see a roadmap. They want to know what they're going to need tomorrow, the next day, that there will be some sort of idea about what their cost of goods or their nut to run their business will be going forward. And that's, I think, where the realm where we are now is that's in flux, and that's where folks are being somewhat have some concern.
And what about yourself, Tom, in terms of what you're hearing?
So just wanted to comment on that. Thank you. So that part of Queens, Jamaica, Queens, in my humble opinion, if here we go. If the folks at Amazon would have chosen Jamaica for the headquarters of Amazon, they would have embraced it with open arms, right? But in the meantime, the former leader of the Greater Jamaica Development Corp, Hope Knight, now is president and CEO of Empire State Development, a great choice. Her successor, Justin Rogers, is doing a fantastic job along with Aaron. But that place in downtown Jamaica has had a great renaissance. There's a company called BRP Properties. Meredith Marshall is on our board. There's 4,000 or 5,000 units being built down there right now. But you think about that like, if you build it, they will come. They're building housing. What comes next? Stores to go shopping, right? But think about because this is an energy event, the tax, the drain on the grid to be able to power all those places, right? Everybody has phones and PCs and all that stuff. All those gadgets and gizmos are always powered on. But I think about things like that when it comes to what Aaron said about the consistency, right? Businesses, people in general thrive on consistency. Councilmember Palladino's bill going up 30, 40, 50%. If you're a small business, you've got to play whack-a-mole every single day about rent and utilities and cost of goods and inflation. It's a really, really challenging environment. And I think the one area where the utilities have done a pretty good job over the course of the last few years. Before the chamber, I worked for an energy startup, so I kind of know I'm a mile wide and an inch deep. It's been 10 years. But, level billing has been a great way for people to kind of understand how things go month to month to month, right? But the challenges that we're facing today with this confluence of all these things are really, really a big challenge for small businesses.
Tom, I wanted to stay with you for a second because you talked about the challenges with the grid. I mean, one of the exciting things about Queens, in particular, where we are now, is all of these development projects that are happening. Residential, a huge stadium going up. There's major projects. What can you say about those projects and how the demand is going to be met?
Thanks for that segue. Queens is definitely the boom borough. There's 3,004 counties in America. We are the most diverse by far. And Brooklyn's not number 2, just for the record. It's Miami-Dade. I love Randy in Brooklyn, but it ain't Brooklyn. It's Miami-Dade. But at the end of the day, within those 3,004 counties, today, we have $40 billion of development. So when I tell my members about getting involved and participating with the chamber and being part of the whole mission, the $40 billion includes anybody that ever did a kitchen or a bathroom. You know what a punch list is at your home? The punch list is happening right now over at LaGuardia. It is beautiful. If you've not been there, you got to just go to visit it as almost a New York landmark. That was $7 or $8 billion, round numbers. JFK is going to be $22 billion. If you like LaGuardia, where do you see JFK? So for jobs. And as Josh said too, we advocated very, very strongly for the New York City Football Club. The last piece of that puzzle is going to be voted on today or tomorrow. But that's a 25,000 seat stadium, all electric. The first all electric stadium of that size and scope ever built in our country. Next to that's going to be 2,500 units of housing and a hotel and a school. And if our friends at Metropolitan Park, Steve Cohen and Hard Rock have their way, a transformation of 50 acres of parking lot into something really, really special. It's a great place to be. But again, I think about that as, other sources of energy. We've been toying around with our Energy and Environmental Committee to find maybe build a district over there in the Flushing Meadows Corona Park area, from the Flushing waterfront all the way over to the Corona area for renewable energy, whether it's things like wind or solar or geothermal, for those that don't really know too much about that. But there's a lot of different sources we can go, but we cannot stop and retard the growth of our county because we're going to have brownouts or blackouts or even worse. But I think right now there's got to be a lot of emphasis put on that to make sure that we're ready for the next 25 or 30 years.
Well, let me add on something on what you said. The demand side of the electricity is enormous. Nobody really have a grip of what is needed for the next 5, 10, 20 years. Just give you a very, very simple statistic. In the month of March, 3 major newspapers, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, both have articles specifically on this issue. Nobody have an idea how much we need, especially after the AI and data center, and like I said, bringing all the manufacturing back to US. You have the EV and all the building converting to electricity. So basically, all the projections about the demand of the electricity is basically the best guess, and the goalposts just keep moving back every time that we look around. So this is really a major issue. I think that the government need to focus and get a grip of the demand, because like I said, the supply is not catching up with the demand in the next few years, and what will happen is, like Tom said, a brownout, blackout. We don't want to fix the problem after it happened because we're trying to prevent them in the first place. Okay.
So, Aaron, your role as Chief Lending Officer, can you talk a little bit about what money is available to businesses in terms of helping them to become more energy efficient?
Sure. So we're just getting started on that, meaning the lending about there's been historical energy efficiency lending, which has really been tied solely to, the amount of savings projected, and you look at the business's cash flow, and then you figure out what kind of loan product you did, how far out you need to go to help finance this project. But there is federal funding that has just been released. There was part of the CDFI network across the country. There was a $20 billion awarded I think it was either Thursday or Friday from the EPA, and that will go to underserved communities like Jamaica, Queens. We'll go to CDFI lenders in the underserved communities like Jamaica, Queens, and what it means is we have the resources. We don't know the full cost of the regulations everybody here was talking about. I don't have a number that I could say, hey, this is what it's going to cost. This is what it's going to do. Each business will be different. What an industrial business will need to invest into their local, into their business versus a storefront will be a very different kind of investment. And we're going to take each of those one by one. But what I can say is that there is federal loan capital that is coming down to urban areas to help businesses in communities like Jamaica, Queens, make the upgrades that are necessary. That the announcement of the awards was just made last week. It'll probably be 3 to 6 months before there will promulgations of sort of the rules and regs around what the CDFI lenders can do. The money was given to national CDFIs. We're a local CDFI, so us in conjunction with the Queens Chamber, who's one of our partners at the CDFI, will be digesting those rules and regs, and then we'll be publishing information about how that kind of capital could be used for local businesses to make the improvements they need.
I think another question for you, Tom, as well, is talk about what you're seeing in terms of new jobs being created, job creation around green energy.
Thank you. So a couple things about that. So something philosophical I want to drop on people here, but during COVID, there was an effort to have people like take their companies out of places like New York, and I got into a couple of verbal spats with the folks on Long Island regarding, now is a great time to move your business to Long Island, right? But at a micro level, it was about outside of the city center, right? Long Island, South Carolina, Florida. My mom and dad were retired down there. He would always tease me about, they're all moving down here, and I'd come back with the pizza and the bagels stink. So you're going to stay in New York anyway? But seriously, if you think about it, right? Our competition today isn't New Jersey and South Carolina and Texas. It's global. It's global. We've got to work as an organization, as a country, as a government, to get our costs to be more in line with reality. Some of the things that we pay for are outrageous. We can go off on a whole tangent about how hard it is to get permits and so on and so forth, which should be a lot easier. But at the end of the day, you need to think about, when you talk to your elected officials, about how you're making it easier for businesses to kind of be in business. Because at the end of the day, they can go elsewhere. To further Josh's question about opportunities. So we formed, after Amazon pulled out, we had them. If you guys are Seinfeld fans, remember that episode with you can take a reservation, you just can't keep a reservation. That was Amazon. We got them. 283 organizations pitched for it. We got them, and we lost them after 9 months, right? I vowed that would never happen again on my watch. We formed a Queens Tech Council. Today, we have 5 tech incubators in Queens County. 5. Jamaica, Rockaway, East Elmhurst. In this building, we've got an incubator. Flushing, and also in Long Island City. Those 5 incubators have 15 tech companies, pure tech companies, and they're 70% minority women owned. We're very, very proud of that. We aim to make Queens the next whatever. Not Silicon Alley, not Silicon Valley. We want to make Queens that place. We have 7 colleges and universities. I want those kids to go, get really smart, get smarter and educated, and stay. Queens College graduates more computer science majors than any school in New York City. I want those kids to stay. I don't want them to go to Austin or anywhere else. And you should be feeling the same way. You don't want your kids, our kids, to go away. So businesses kind of want to be here. We look at it as we're working on convening, having them come and stay for all the benefits that we do have. Energy plays a big part in that when they grow their businesses and grow their employee base.
Henry, why don't we talk about the Queens and Bronx Association? I know you've been very involved in that organization. How are they playing a role in all this?
Well, listen, we are builders. We're very resourceful. If it's needed to be done, we will do it. It's not the point of whether we can get it done or not. It's about the cause, about the reliability of the whole thing. So, like I said, we are looking at all the options, but unfortunately, there are always options to compensate for the shortcoming of the system, but it would cost money. It would need space to put in extra equipment. So all those things are our major concern. As you know, that anything goes wrong, people always bring the builder. So we always very concerned.
Aaron, one of the things that, and I don't know if you can give perspective on this or not, is there's clearly an upfront investment that a lot of these companies have to make in order to meet the criteria that are needed. Is there any lifespan that they're looking at in terms of number of years to pay off these investments?
Again, I don't have a textbook answer for you. It's more than 5 or 6. So these are not short-term investments. We did a solar project some years back, and that was with heavy incentives, and we were still north of probably 10 years, in the payback cycle in that time. The electrification that we're talking about, sort of to piggyback a little bit off of what Tom was talking about, I do think there is opportunity for job creation here. I do think that one of the side effects of regulation is now there are new things that have to be done. Those new things have to have technical, they have there's a trades component to it. There will be additional costs. There will be some there job creation that goes with that, which is, I guess, the net benefit of a lot of these changes. But there's none of these are low cost. They all seem to be on the high end of cost. The low hanging fruit of sort of the insulation and things like that. Our businesses have been dealing with that. They've been able to absorb a lot of that cost. It's the future spending on the electrification, I think, that will have to sort of play itself out. And that it's at that point that we'll start, probably as a CDFI, analyzing the costs and the terms that would be necessary, and then going back to our funders and saying, listen, this is the kind of money we would need, and this is the kind of terms we would need to be able to make this affordable for the small businesses, mostly minority businesses, in our case in Jamaica, Queens, that are operating. And I think we have a receptive ear to a lot of those funders. I think a lot of the funding at the federal level, like I said, that I think will trickle down to the local level, will help that. But I don't think we know yet the exact prescription. But it is a very long-term investment. Don't think in the number of 3, 4, 5 years. You have to think more like 10, 15 kind of years.
So this has been a pretty kind of a gloomy, doomy type of presentation so far, a conversation, but it's real. So that's also a really important piece. All is not lost. So there's projects like Hydro Quebec from the Champlain Hudson Group that's coming down from, that's even better. That's coming down from Quebec. And it's, again, all things center in Queens, right? It's coming across hundreds and hundreds of miles through New York State, down, terminating in Astoria. There's things like wind. Our friends at National Grid Ventures, I mentioned about that Queens Tech Council. National Grid Ventures has a seat at that table. I want them to be able to understand and see the future of a technological advance that they could potentially fund for some of the companies that we find, right? So there's lots of brain power going on this. I just think you ought to think about it in the term of all is not lost, and there's a lot of forward progression going on in a very, very positive way.
And if I could, so you have, when we talk about construction trades, you have like National Grid had the Grid Collective, I think it was called, right? And it was about training. There was, we know that there were, let's say, people in the construction fields, but they may not have had the experience in insulation. They may not have had the experience in minor tweaks that would need to happen. And you also have to know that as some of these, let's say, for instance, in National Grid's case or Con Edison's case, they often have an incentive package that can go along with a program. But you need to be an approved supplier. You need to be an approved vendor. So we have found a lot of businesses coming to us in the construction trades to borrow to work on these projects. And those are project by project lending. So they would come to us and say, hey, I got this contract to do X kind of work for an energy efficiency project. It's going to run us 6 months, but we're going to need money to go up front on that. We're going to need to pay payroll. We're going to need to buy material to mobilize for that contract. So we've stepped in and helped to fund those kind of projects, but they're the front end, not the long-term end of the project. We're helping the contractor get through the construction phase. We haven't yet figured out the terms and the longevity of the loan itself to help the business, who's going to be the end user of that.
Can any of you talk to solar? I know that Bill had brought up the solar panels being built. Is there anything that you can say in regards to that?
I can touch on that a little bit. So part of our energy committee, we've got a bunch of different solar providers. Some of the challenges are everybody thinks solar is a fit for every single kind of property. I don't know have all the answers, but it has to have a southern exposure, and it has to have a certain pitch on the roof and so on. But wherever we can do that, we go to try. Councilmember Palladino mentioned about these co-ops and condos. Majority have not pitched roofs, but flat roofs. And people that are in the solar business will tell you that the solar application can pay for the roof repair because you want to put a solar array on an established roof, not one that needs to be replaced in 5 or 10 years, which is kind of an aha moment, right? But if you can build it up there on the flat roof below the parapet, you're not going to see it necessarily. And a lot of installations are happening. The one that's the most famous right now is being built down at JFK. It's going to be unbelievable. It's going to power a huge part of the JFK load for power in general. But solar should be a big part of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I would just say that there was a program years ago, which was an accelerated depreciation program at the federal level. And I would love to see something like that come back because we have a lot of businesses who would be interested. But, depreciating it takes a while. And if they could accelerate that, I think you get a lot of people's attention very quickly. It is a good program. We worked with a manufacturer once who was, just the nature of their business. They had a big building that they did manufacture. They did a lot of room, and they didn't have as much heavy equipment as a typical manufacturer in that kind of space. They were able to mostly go off the grid with their solar. But again, it's the incentives that really help to drive a lot of the activity there.
Well, solar actually is a very interesting power source, but obviously have this shortcoming as well. As it's solar, so you have to be in the daytime in sunlight. So in a cloudy day or a long period of cloudy day, then you have a problem of the production is not even. So it relies on heavily on the storage, and that's where the costs come in. You have to store the solar power when the day is not producing a lot, so we can supply them. So that's the issue on those things that people have to look at it. So it's not a one solution for all. I mean, there's a lot of backups in terms of natural resource. Wind is another thing. There's no wind, there's no power. So it's very simple. So that the backup system is playing a big part in terms of maintaining the output of those systems.
Well, I want to thank each of you for being on our first panel, and a round of applause, please. And we're going to transition to our next panels. But why don't we start off same way as that last panel? I'd love for each of our panelists just to say hello this morning and just introduce themselves. One of the things I'd love for you to do, council members, is just tell everyone the neighborhoods that your district entails.
Vicky Palladino, District 19. I represent Northeast Queens. West is College Point. We go through Whitestone. We go through Malba. We go through parts of Bayside, North Flushing, and as far east as Little Neck Douglaston. So west, College Point, far east would be Little Neck Douglaston. And I welcome National Grid. Thank you so much for having me here today. You did an excellent presentation when I called upon you, and you helped me understand a lot of different things that I did not know. So thank you for having me here today.
Good morning. Ralph Cleveland. I'm the president and CEO for the American Association of Blacks in Energy. I've been in this energy sector for over 40 years, so I'm a little older than I look. Hopefully, anyway. So I started my career in oil and gas and have worked in natural gas utilities for over 15 years. And so the thing that I would tell you is that, you know, at our association, we have an all of the above strategy relative to how we address these issues. I've also served as the president and CEO for the North American Energy Standards Board that really sets the framework for sale of wholesale and retail electricity and natural gas. So I come at this from a standpoint of an energy professional that's been at this for a while, but also I come at it particularly as it relates to our community. Who's going to be the voice for the vulnerable customer? So with that.
Thank you. I'm Donna Drummond. I'm the Chief Expense Officer and Chief Sustainability Officer for Northwell Health. I am not the energy expert by any means. I'm a CPA by training. I worked in JP Morgan for 15 years, and I've been with Northwell for 22 years. When we look at our emissions, our scope 1 and scope 2, and scope 3. Scope 3 is the vast majority of our emissions. At 80% of our total emissions as a health system. But obviously scope 1 and 2 are very, very important to our operations, and we've made a commitment to be net zero by 2050. So I lead that effort for Northwell along with our engineering team. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jay Williams. I am the owner of a property management firm called Summit Property Management Services, Inc. Primarily here in the capacity of my company's management of Rochdale Village, which is located in Southeast Queens, one of the largest microgrid communities in the country. And the local Law 97 is of high concern to us, even though we have a bit of reprieve because we are a Mitchell-Lama development. We are just, like everyone here, looking to make sense of how this gets done. While it is well-intended, the question is the how.
Jay, let's stick with you for the time being. Talk a little bit more about Rockdale Village for people that aren't fully aware of the affordable housing, how you generate some of your power. Just share some of those things.
Sure. So Rochdale Village was built in the early 60s, opened in 1963, was one of the first integrated communities in the country. So that's a landmark in and of itself. In addition to that, we have our own power plant, and they're not connected to Con Ed's grid at all, generate our own power. And in the past decade or so, we've done many things in order to upgrade our power plant, in order to be more efficient and make sure that there's not such a draw on the community when we use our power. So we have over 10,000 LED light fixtures we did over 10 years ago. More recently, within the past 7 years, we upgraded our power plant. So I did hear the keynote speaker talk earlier about an initiative to take in essentially 4,000 cars off the road. We've done almost that. We've got 3,600 cars off the road with our NOx emission reduction. So those are things that we're able to do with 60-year-old tech. And now we're looking forward to how to do this in the future with regard to hydrogen and how that can all work. Challenging for us, again, because we are Mitchell-Lama, we are affordable. Because we're not linked to the grid, we don't get the advantages that a NYSERDA can give us. Hopefully that changes in the future. And National Grid has been a great partner for us because we do use natural gas to produce our energy. And they have been able to help us with all those initiatives that we have done. So whether it's roofing, whether it's insulation, whether it's a power plant, energy reduction, they've been very helpful with helping partially fund those items.
Thank you so much. And we're going to come back to you in terms of, you know, whether or not this legislation has thought about communities such as Rockdale Village that generate their own power. So, you know, quite interesting. Donna, let's talk a little bit about Northwell. Northwell is a huge institution here in New York City, Long Island, across New York State. And, you know, I found it really interesting chatting with you before this conference, talking through, you know, really what are Northwell's goals when it comes to clean and green energy.
Sure. So as I mentioned, we signed the Health and Human Services Pledge. So we've committed to be net zero by 2050. and reduce our energy consumption in Scope 1 and Scope 2 by 50% by 2030. We've been on this journey since 2010 when our CEO, Michael Dowling, who's a visionary in many ways, signed a commitment to the EPA to reduce our emissions. In the last few years, we've invested in our infrastructure, LED lighting, retro commissioning, all those things that you can do. We've made a commitment and we created a fund. So for the savings that are a result of those investments, we are then able to reinvest into new products across programs across our organization. For instance, in Staten Island, we're building a solar array. We're working on, we're testing out to see if we can do a geothermal plant in one of our hospitals on the east end of Long Island. We're working with National Grid on hydrogen in a couple of our other locations. We're able to access funding from NYSERDA as well as from the Inflation Reduction Act, which is new for a nonprofit organization. One of the things that I pointed out when we spoke, and I don't think you had known, is while we are a large organization and a successful organization and the largest employer in New York State in healthcare, we operate on a 1.5% margin, very, very slim. Our expenses and our investments in our people and our community almost overtake the revenue that we receive. So we have to make sure that we are very, very careful about our investments and make sure that they have the ROI that we need to continue to invest.
Ralph, when we spoke, there's obviously a reason that we're looking to find more efficiency in green energy. And, I'd love to hear from your perspective, what are the risks and hazards associated particularly with climate change should things go unabated?
A terrific question. So if you look globally at the investments that are being made, we're actually making investment at about half of what we need to arrest climate change. What the statistics and the data show relative to climate change is that if we don't bring this under control, we could be looking at $2.3 quadrillion worth of damage and adverse impact to economies globally. That's a huge number. And so certainly the investment is needed, and we've got to take steps to do that. Some of the issues that we're running into are labor shortages, issues with respect to equity in terms of who gets access to the new technology, issues of affordability. All these are things that make this a very complex problem to solve. And this is why we need everyone at the table to talk about what some of the unintended consequences of some of the policy decisions are. So and again, from our standpoint, we really try to speak for those who are most vulnerable in the system, in communities that, particularly in urban communities, climate change is going to have a particularly exacerbated impact just because of air conditioning and other things that are going to be needed. And so, as has already been stated, folks are having to make decisions about whether or not they get the drugs they need or pay their utility bill, whether they buy groceries or pay the utility bill. These are not decisions that folks, that we really want people in our society to have to make. And so how we address these issues is so critical and so important. But we also know that we do have to solve this problem. And we've got to bring more minds and more skilled labor to this problem. So that's sort of my take on what's happened.
Councilmember Palladino, you spoke about the issues in Local Law 97. A lot of these were legislation before you were even involved in them. So what is your focus now for your constituents? You talked about there must be some angry people walking in the door with their bills. What has been your focus?
My focus has always been information. Information is key. Knowledge is key. And when we heard about Local Law 97 back in 2019, I did my due diligence to read and to learn about what it was. I had no intentions of running for office. And as it turns out, when I took on the charge of Local Law 97 and what it was going to do and impact while we're talking here about commercial uses. I'm talking about the everyday Joe and Jane. And when we get involved with the people who are the heartbeat of this city, and we find out now that, again, through the knowledge, that they are simply going to suffocate. You see, I'm one of these people who don't completely agree that the world is going to end tomorrow and that climate change is a life or death situation, that we have to meet it by a certain deadline or the planet's going to erupt. I do not agree with that at all. I believe in common sense. If there's an issue, there's a way to work with the issue. And there's a way to go about it in a very common sense sort of way. Putting these timelines up are unrealistic for the average person who lives in this city. So what I have done and what my office has done and what several other offices have done is just basically understand that if we are facing this and we are facing that, let's approach it in a sensible way. And we can do that. You know, everybody laughs when they hear about California and the brownouts. Well, these brownouts are going to be very real here. This grid, we have no idea, and one of my pieces of legislation was to do a feasibility study on the grid. What is so difficult about doing that? And yet it's not being done. So we are implementing these draconian fines, which I'll get into, about one particular co-op that's facing $24 million in fines. Understand, these fines are rolling. They're just not a one-time hit. No, they're not. They are rolling. And what you don't meet this year, guess what? Your fines are greater the year to follow. So I don't understand. I do know that my husband works on a movie set. And he's in local union 817. Those are those big trucks that set up. Well, they shot one movie on one set, one scene they were going to use just solar power. Guess what? The solar power died. And guess what they had to do? They had to hook up a gas-powered generator. We're not ready for this yet. Let's do this sensibly. And that my most important thing is to bring the knowledge to the constituents and to the people of this city. And this is what they have to understand. Thank you.
Just staying with you for the next question, what is some of the legislation that you're currently proposing to address some of this?
Well, right now, the legislation is so simple. It's just a rolling delay. For every timeline that's met, it's met with 7 years. So this timeline that was passed for 2024, January this year, I'm asking for a roll of 7 years. And whatever timeline is hit in 25, so that they're not hit with these crazy fines, another 7 years until they could catch up. And like I said, the other piece is to do a complete feasibility study on the grid. This is necessary. And anybody who thinks it's not, you're not facing reality here. You're simply not.
Ralph, in that previous panel, we were talking about job creation. There is definitely opportunity to create new companies and new jobs. And I would love to hear from you how the Black and brown communities are being represented now in this new, call it, workforce, and really what needs to be done to have greater opportunity in the future.
Yeah, it's a real challenge. So there are about 8.1 million jobs across the energy sector, and here in the U.S. That's a growth of about 300,000 jobs in 1 year, from 2021 to 2022. I don't have the 2023 data yet, but when you look at the representation within that, communities of color are underrepresented in that workforce. For the Black community, we make up about 8% of that workforce, it should be around 12% from an equity standpoint. So the question becomes, how do we get more in our community, in Black and brown communities, engaged and involved, and understanding that the opportunity that exists here. But when we see whether or not our community has access to those things that will create that opportunity for them, as an example, being able to take on STEM-related roles, being able to take computer science classes, at the colleges and universities, what you find is Black and brown communities across the nation, only about 50% have access to the coursework that would fully prepare them to take these courses in college. So we've got to do some things at the fundamental level, but here's the issue, and here's why it's all of our problem to solve. More than half of the kids 18 and under in our school systems today, more than half, are Black and brown kids. So if we don't fix this equity issue, every company in here is going to struggle finding the labor you need, finding the talent you need. And so we've got to create pathways. And the biggest issue for Black and brown communities is not whether or not they can do the work. The biggest issue is financially, can they afford what it takes in terms of access? In so many instances, and I'll give you some other statistics here just to help you understand. This is just at the K through 12 level, kind of what's happening. If you look at talented and gifted programs, there are about 3 million kids identified as talented and gifted. Well, that's actually underrepresented, the studies show, by about half. There should be another 3 million in those programs. And when you look at who's not getting the opportunity, it's typically Black and brown kids. So how do we create greater access? How do we remove some of the financial barriers? And I'll just talk about college here just for a second. And I'll use Georgia as an example. When Georgia put the state of Georgia put the Hope Scholarship in, that basically paid any student that had a B average or greater could stay in state and go to college and have it basically covered. And so the flagship university within the university system of Georgia is the University of Georgia. They saw an increase in the amount of diversity that they had in the school, a pretty significant impact. But they saw the SAT scores go up. That just speaks to this issue of it's an access and a financial issue. It is not a capability issue. So how do we put things in place that is going to allow greater participation of every community relative to this? And this energy sector is going to have the largest sort of job growth from a percentage standpoint of any industry. It's already happening. We're seeing tremendous job growth in electric vehicles. We're seeing tremendous job growth in other renewables. And again, we take an all of the above strategy. We need both electrons and molecules. So from a molecule standpoint, hydrogen, we need to think about how you integrate the renewables on the grid with backup from things like natural gas and other things. We do need to be very smart about how we go about doing this. But these opportunities exist. And again, if we don't fix this, it's going to be all of our problems from a standpoint of getting access to the talent that's needed. I'll say it one more time. 18 and under, the kids that are 18 and under in your K through 12 system across the nation, right now, the majority are Black and brown kids. What are we going to do? How are we going to help them get access to what they need to get the education, to get a STEM job? Because these jobs are less likely to have a downturn, to be lost in some of the economic downturns. They also pay better. And so how these STEM jobs go has a big impact on how a community goes.
Let the education system work. Let the parents be in tune to their children. Some kids don't think they're scientists or carpenters or mathematicians Until you give them a project to build, all of a sudden they know how to use a slide ruler and they know how to do math. They're just not learning it in the very traditional form. This is a new world we're living in. The kids need to be brought up to speed. We could do that with parent involvement and with proper leadership in our schools. There are other roads to meet the same means, and this is very important. It's not a one-size-fits-all anymore, and there are alternatives, and I passed legislation for that as well.
Couldn't agree with you more. Northwell, you might have seen in the news, just worked with Bloomberg, and we're creating in Woodside a high school for health careers. And the intent of that is training that they could leave right from that high school and go right into work. We need those workers, and then provide them further opportunities if they want to increase their education after that. But to come out of high school and be able to make a living wage is our goal. So we couldn't agree with you more.
This is so important. People don't realize
Yeah.
this is huge.
Donna, do you want to talk a little bit more about your resiliency plan?
So part of the Health and Services Pledge is that we had to provide a resiliency plan in 2023. And I have to tell you, and hopefully you all can appreciate this, we are very resilient. We know we have to be when an impact of climate change hits, when there's a hurricane or a superstorm or whatever it is, our hospitals are always up and running. We make sure that they are resilient, that they are fortified. But the plan that we had to submit last year went beyond that. They asked us to understand the needs of the community and what the impact of climate change will have on those communities. So we work together with our population health team, with our strategic planning team, our facilities and infrastructure team, and I'm extremely proud, it's on our website if you'd like to read it, of our resiliency plan. We identified that there are 34 communities spanning 6 counties that we operate in that are subject to the impacts of climate change, whether it because of their low-lying where they are and there's risk of flooding because of a lack of tree canopy. So we identified and we're targeting and working with those communities to understand how we can help and what we can do. On April 18th, for instance, we have a partnership with the First Baptist Church of Corona, a climate, faith, and justice meeting, so we can understand from the community what are your concerns and what can we do to help beyond the walls of Northwell, how we can help. We can't fix everything. We can't possibly, but we can work with other organizations, some of whom are represented here today, and try to identify opportunities. One of the such things that we're doing work with Carrier Corporation, and they're donating 31 machines to purify the air that we're helping donate to some of the schools and communities that we work with. So the resiliency plan was a key component of that commitment, and we will continue to work and to improve the communities we're in as well as Northwell. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Jay, we talked about Rockdale Village and how you generate your own power. It doesn't seem that Local Law 97 took into account communities such as Rockdale Village. So I would like you to explain, why that wasn't the case and what would be needed in order to take that into consideration.
Yeah, sure. So it didn't take affordable housing into consideration. Sort of missing the forest for the trees. As I said earlier, it's in good spirit that we conserve energy and that we become more clean. Obviously, we see the weather changing, and I can tell you it has affected insurance rates already. I can't imagine what they'll be in 10 years from now. But I think what needs to happen now is what our goal has been, and I have been meeting with other Mitchellamas of my type. I think the only way is to go back to our legislators and ask them to look at this again. Because we're a Mitchellama, luckily we've got some time, but there are affordable housing communities that have to comply now. And I don't know how they're going to do it. And I don't know how we're going to do it even in 10 years. Now, we are a limited for-profit as Mitchellama, so we budget as if we're not for-profit. We seek to earn just enough to be able to keep the community going. And what happens when you introduce connecting to the grid and those costs associated with that? How do you ask your community to pay for that? I'll tell you this, post-COVID, I'm meeting with all my communities to talk to them about what's going on with inflation of materials. So a piece of plyboard prior to the pandemic was $19. Now it's $60. Now that gets exacerbated across a place like Rochester, which is in essence a small city. I have 20,000 people that live there. So I've got to keep the place clean. I've got to keep the place secure. We've got to redo apartments. We've got to upkeep. All those costs have gone up astronomically. And insurance, again, it's unbelievable. There are communities like mine doing double-digit increases just for insurance. How do we do this? And then local law 97 on top of that, the hits just keep coming, and I don't see how this can sustain. So what's really needed is the legislators to take a look at this. There's got to be a plan for funding of some kind. Otherwise, you price out all of New York City. I don't see any other way it can work.
Going back to your own energy generation, what would be involved in connecting your community to the grid?
So I'll talk about what will be involved, and then I'll talk about some of the limitations that I see. So in order for my community to connect to the grid, Rochester Village, we would have to have what's called a Con Ed block house, which is a major hub to be able to connect a 6 megawatt power plant to the grid. We've looked at it in the past. It's in the tens of millions of dollars to even get there. So that's impossible for us to do at this time. Let's just say something happens and that's done. There are also fees associated with being connected to the grid as a power plant that we have to consider. And then the overarching question I have in my mind that the councilwoman brought up is the feasibility of the grid's ability to handle communities of my size. So when the city has a blackout, our lights are on. So it's, what are we doing here? That's the big question here. And the other question is, our plant, according to our studies, is more efficient than the grid's plant. So are we going backwards? So those are questions that really need to be examined in order for us to make it make sense.
At this point, I mean, would you have to make an assessment to each member in order to pay for this? What are you looking at in terms of options?
I mean, an assessment, so if you were doing an assessment on the community to pay for it, you'd essentially make Rochdale unaffordable. So to me, that's a non-starter. Like I would never want to ask my community to do that. I would say that there's got to be a more prudent way to get to where we need to get to. There's got to be a pathway that doesn't eliminate affordable housing.
Thank you. Donna, back towards yourself and Northwell. It seems that you guys have been very proactive. And I think one of the big obstacles for small businesses is even figuring out what has to happen. So what resources can you potentially share that you've been able to utilize to figure out best practices and to figure out how to create the resiliency plan that you put together?
Sure. So back to Local Law 97, we're a member of the Greater New York Hospital Association Energy Council, working with our peers in healthcare to understand the impact of Local Law 97. It'll have a significant financial impact on us as well. So we're working together to identify opportunities to prepare and plan and make the investments necessary to minimize the impact of that. As I already mentioned, the solar, the geothermal plant, et cetera. We are a member of the U.S. Healthcare Climate Council. It's 19 actually health systems across the country. We're learning from our peers in California. They're ahead of the game with all of the things that they need to do there. So Kaiser Permanente, et cetera. And internationally, the Healthcare Climate Council is a part of Healthcare Without Harm, which is an international organization. And the health institutes in England and other places in Europe are much further ahead with us about being energy efficient. But it's not, as I mentioned before, 80% of our emissions come from the things that we buy. the disposable plastic supplies that we need to use for quality and safety of patient care. But there are ways to build those or to create those things that are less harmful to the environment. So we're working with a number of our suppliers, Becton Dickinson, for instance, who is investing in this. We've got a new machine that we put in our laboratory. It's Envitech. It's a company out of Ireland. And it takes our lab refuse, so think Petri dishes and vacutainers and things like that, and it transforms them into recyclable waste. Now, under New York state law today, it's not recyclable. It's still considered treated medical waste. So we're working with a number of organizations, including the state, to have it classified as recyclable. And then two avenues. One, it can be recycled into other reusable products, like some plastic containers, or one of the projects we're hoping to work with Becton Dickinson, full circularity, that they will then be made right back into Petri dishes and other supplies. So we're working with pretty much anybody that we possibly can. But that 80% for us is very different than I know what the focus of today is. But we do have to find ways to reduce waste, not open things in the OR that don't need to be opened until they need to be opened, never sacrificing quality. Don't do tests that you don't need to do. But ultimately, preventive health care is the most sustainable health care. And if we keep our people healthy, our employees and the community we serve, then we're not wasting it all.
Talk a little bit also, though, we had mentioned when we chatted, a little bit about what your requirements are to your vendors, because you deal with so many vendors.
Mm-hmm. We are working with our vendors and working with them to build contract language in to say we want to make sure that there's not excess packaging, that your items are recyclable. Can we reprocess them? We're requesting that they meet us at least halfway on this, and they recognize that they have to. Most of them are publicly traded companies, so they're going to have to report on this shortly as well.
Terrific. So, Ralph, you're well positioned sitting next to an elected official. Talk a little bit about how your organization focuses on informing policymakers to make sure that the Black and brown communities of New York City are getting, whether it's education or opportunities, properly.
Yeah, so first for us, it really starts with informing, being able to have the dialogue that's needed to help provide some insight as to what's happening in the various communities. So providing, from our standpoint, doing the analysis to understand what's really happening, creating insight, and then sharing that insight with others. I just give you some examples of what I'm describing. So when we talk about vulnerable customers, every year there's LIHEAP and other forms of aid that's provided by the federal government, but the need is about $27 billion. It's somewhere between 4 and 5 billion every year. The need is $27 billion. So how do we begin to think about making up that gap? How do we mobilize more resources so that these vulnerable customers have their needs met? The other thing is, when you look at vulnerable customers, only about 1/3 who are eligible apply to get the aid that they should have access to. There are all kinds of trust issues about providing your financial information and other things. And so it's so important to really understand who's in the mix in the various stakeholder groups and what are they going through? How complex are these things for them to have to even sort through to make quality decisions? And so, and from our standpoint, and I'll say it this way. As we've had this whole conversation here this morning, you've heard about all different types of technology. You've heard about all different stakeholders. You've heard about some of the impacts, some of the tensions, some of the complexity that's associated with it. Anytime we are managing diverse mixtures. And the diverse mixture here is around technology, it's around people. There's a whole host of attributes you would have to look at. But anytime there's those similarities and differences, there's going to be complexity and tension. And truly what I find is that we need to start to elevate our ability as leaders to make quality decisions in the midst of similarities, differences, complexity, and tension. It is not easy. But there is skill to be had. There is a way that you can think about it if you bring everybody to the table with the right tools to have a conversation around it. In so many instances today, things quickly polarize. So how do we begin to have a conversation that is not demonizing people for having a different opinion? How do we start to do that? And so from our standpoint, what we want to do most of all, besides providing that analysis, the insight, the understanding of who's in the mix, what are their struggles, what are their challenges, what are the access issues? Do you have a distributional justice issue? Do you have a procedural justice issue? I mean, y'all know you cannot have trust in any system unless you have both distributional justice and procedural justice. You got to have both. And so what we try to do is provide insight and as it relates to those issues of what's happening, but then also what we try to do is impart a set of skills in our organization around how do you make quality decisions? How do you manage diversity to get to the right outcomes for all involved? That's so critical and so important. So,
Thank you. Councilman, let's talk about electrification. What are some of the challenges to really electrifying New York City?
Well, I think first of all, it's going way too fast. I don't have the answers. I am not in the business as these people are. All I do is I take the information that's given, process it, and put it out there. What are solutions to the electrification of New York City? Slow it down right now. We're not ready. I mean, I can't think of any other way to say it. We're simply not ready yet to go at the speed that they're going. Slow it down. Take a step, one step at a time. Common sense. And to your point, I want to say, you know, what we're leaving out here in all this technology talk is the human factor. There is a very, very big human factor here that we seem to be forgetting about. We're talking about sciences, we're talking about technology, and we're talking about in language that a lot of people just simply don't understand. So we have to bring the human factor in and make it personal. And once we do that, and we could get around a table and conversate, which I agree with you 100%. You know, to be polarized, as you said, we are. We are living in a polarized society. We can't be too left, we can't be too right. And yet, when you try to take in that middle piece, as I do every single day, and to sit people at a table and have a conversation and figure out what we can do together to figure out the next step. It's a multi-prong process, but not a process that should ever be overlooked. And that's one of the reasons why I ran for city council. I saw things that were broke and I wanted to fix it. I never planned on being a city councilwoman, not ever. But I did know that I have a purpose. And it's been a purpose all through my life. And that is to bring people together, solve problems by dealing with the here and now and the issues that we're dealing with. And again, I don't have the full answer to your question about how do we go about electrifying New York City other than to say, take a deep breath, everybody, because we're moving way too fast.
I want to stick with you because, you know, the conversation with Jay about how is this going to be, you know, afforded. I know that the state is currently considering tax credits or abatements to support the conversion to green energy. Obviously, you're in the city, so how do you feel about that? And you know, can the city do something in that nature at all?
Look, I am for anything absolutely anything that could help our struggling middle class when it comes to these draconian fines that are going to be placed upon them. You know, we do have up in the state right now something similar to the J1 tax abatements that were given out at one time. That's one way to look at it. But when we talk about what's happening and at the amount of speed that it's going at, there's absolutely no way these tax abatements are going to help, but they're cookie cutters. You know, cookie cutter doesn't work. We need to get to the meat and the potatoes of it. So I really feel at this point in time, honestly, like I just said, it's really for me is to delay. I said it earlier at the podium about the what's going on with Con Edison and our bills, and how we hear from our constituents every single day that they just cannot afford to live where they're living because their bills are too high. And to you, I say, we're in a pickle. We are in a real pickle, and that's being polite. But I'm up on stage, so I can't, I can't really say exactly what I want to say. But I do say this. I'll go into it detail because I do have an exact replica of what's going on in Glen Oaks, and you will be amazed at what it's going to be costing these people every single year. It's insane.
I don't know. You surprised me. You wouldn't say what you want to say. I feel like you're the kind of woman that says exactly what's on your mind. Donna, you talked a little bit about how you were learning from other healthcare organizations, and this question actually is for Jay, because you had mentioned also how you were meeting with other housing communities that are similar in nature. But how else are you going about finding out resources and really getting more information to be able to understand and execute the requirements as they are now?
Right. So when I meet with the other housing companies, we've got the same sort of question. And sort of what I tell all of my shareholders when they want something that I think is a little unreasonable is I go, well, anything's possible with money. So how are we going to pay for it? So to that end, I go back to what I said earlier. It's really about legislating tax breaks like the J51 you mentioned earlier, or providing direct funding to be able to accomplish this and maintain affordability. So that's really our tact at this point, because for the ones that are like me with the power plant, there are two questions. It's if we're going to do it, how do we afford it? And the second part is if we're more efficient, does it make sense for us to convert? So those are questions we have to answer. But our main goal is to be able to acquire the funding to do it. So I can't speak to city funding. I'm just not as familiar with it, or state funding, but federal funding. If you look at that, how much waste is there is what I wonder. And even when to look at the spending on our military, for instance, is 10 times another country necessary when we have all these challenges at home and we have all these challenges with the environment that we're experiencing. Is it necessary? And can that funding be applied wholesale to the rest of the country to conserve energy? We all see the weather changing. I noticed it. I grew up in Long Island in Islip. I used to have snow. We don't have snow anymore. So I'm just noticing a difference personally. So if it's going to get worse, possibly, I think there should be a refocus on where the funding should be spent.
Thank you. Donna, let's talk a little bit about Northwell's leadership. A lot of people admire that, and then a lot of people say, well, Northwell has resources that we don't have. So you had mentioned the slim margin that you operate on. But talk a little bit about how you were able to invest in some of these initiatives, and really, what are you looking at in terms of timeline for this to pay back?
So can I say something before I answer that question? Sure. So I just want to say, because there is a lot of doom and gloom and concern. But I just want to say I'm a product of Queens. I grew up in Glen Oaks. My father died when I was 9, so I'm a product of Social Security. I went to St. John's University, another great institution. We mentioned Queens College before. I went to Martin Van Buren High School, and to give away my age, I was in this SP program, if anybody knows that. Okay? All right. So there's hope, right? I was given a lot of opportunities, and I know that our public institutions can continue to do that today. So I'm sorry, I just had to say that.
No, please, go right ahead.
Northwell, we choose our margin. We choose to invest in our community. We choose to dedicate resources. We choose to invest in research, in education. We do all these things, and it ends up with a slim margin, 1.5%. So what we do with that is we try to wisely make investments in infrastructure, as I mentioned before, that are needed, okay? But that will also give a return. So we invested $10 million in energy-related projects that generated over $33 million in savings in reduced energy costs. We take those savings and we reinvest them in new projects. We're working right now to understand the Inflation Reduction Act. It's quite complicated. Okay, and we've got a number of very, very sophisticated people trying to help us understand this and trying to make additional investments to increase and further fortify our organization. Everything we do has to have a return. With a 1% margin, you can't invest in all of those infrastructure needs and the MRI machines and all of the other people that you need to hire. So we're very careful about it. We've got a lot of smart people and advisors that help us do that, and the other organizations we're working with.
Ralph, if you don't mind me throwing a question at you, I'd love to hear about organizations that you feel are taking a leadership role in terms of, the areas that you've talked about, particularly around diversity.
So thank you for the question. In so many instances, those who are underrepresented don't necessarily have a voice at the table in a lot of instances. And as the saying goes, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu. So this issue of how do you create space at the table for everyone is a very important one. And so we certainly view ourselves as one of those who will speak up on behalf of underrepresented and underserved communities. There truly are many others. So the National Urban League has a really good program, I think, for workforce development, economic development, and the like, and we certainly want to continue to partner with them. There are organizations we partner with, like the National Energy Foundation, that goes into schools and teaches kids more about this energy sector. And they are very focused on, how to, again, because of the demographics, how do we become more inclusive relative to that? And so our standpoint is we'll work with anyone that is looking to make a positive impact. And the other approach that we take is, how do we do these things in such a way that is more about fixing the system than it is about whether it's a race or gender issue. So how do you create more opportunity for everyone involved, but it's specifically addressing issues that tend to be exclusionary for our community. Whether it's in supplier diversity, there are just practices that folks take for granted. A one-size-fits-all program for risk management, requiring companies that bring you very little risk to take on tremendous amount of insurance burden. I mean, these things are some of the things that get in the way. So the National Minority Supplier Development Council is one that I think is doing good work. And so there are many of these organizations. We have organizations that we've helped to foster their birth and growth and development, Asians in energy, Hispanics in energy. And so we truly want every community at the table to have the conversations that we need to have. And the more of those voices that we can have, the greater insight that we can have relative to the challenges that we all face. See, because I truly believe one of the biggest issues is there's an empathy gap. There's an empathy gap. We don't understand what the others are going through. We haven't stopped, to your point, we haven't stopped long enough to listen. And if you've never done this, I would encourage you to do it. There's a poverty simulator that walks you through the decisions, the day-to-day decisions that people in that situation have to make. Absolutely. So that you gain some insight. Any and everybody that I know that have gone through that poverty simulator, at some point in time, you reach a point of despair. And that's when the empathy kicks in. When you can have compassion and truly understand what other people are going through. And so those are the things I think any of us, in terms of, making sure that there is representation at the table. I would ask any of you, when you're in a meeting and you don't see difference, maybe that's something that you ought to consider and think about. Because without those voices and without those perspectives, you probably don't have all the information you need to make quality decisions.
Yeah, well said. Council member, you talk about the need to delay. Jay, you talked about the predicament that you're personally in. What advice would you give to a Jay or to the average person that's having struggles paying their bills? What advocacy or how should they go about communicating their concerns most effectively from the perspective of their representatives?
That's an excellent question. Sadly, most of the representation that presently sits on the city council does not recognize a great deal of the minority communities, though they represent the minority communities. When you talk about something such as my legislation and the impact that it's going to have on their communities, you talk about sitting down at a table. They don't want to sit down at a table. This has become a very polarized situation. It's not good. People often ask, how do they get elected to office? How do they get elected to office? 7,000 people turn out and vote for that city council district. In my district, 22,000 people turned out. But when you go into these other communities and they all stomp their feet about equality and how they need to listen and yet ask them what they're doing, you don't even find them in their districts. They aren't even aware of Local Law 97. I had to bring it to them. And then when I asked them to get involved and hear me out, the answer was no. Why is that? It's common sense. Let's sit at the table. Let's discuss. Because that's what I do. And like you, I was born and raised in Queens. My father died when I was 6. My clothes came out of a Hebrew center in black plastic bags, though my mother never told me that. My mother would make it sound like I was being given a gift by the neighbor who lived around the corner by the name of Marsha Mason. So when you walk a mile in someone's shoes, you see age up here. Age has been proven that we've gotten through a lot of what we've gotten through. Life has not been a cakewalk, but yet we know on the other side there's always light. There's darkness, right? People always see things in a very dark way. I know, and we know, because we survived, that there's light on the other side. So I want to say this. Take into account when you go to vote. Take into account your elected officials that are running. Find out where they sit on the issues. Because when it comes to passing nonsensical laws, city council's right there for it. But when it comes to serious meat and potato issues, I'm sorry, they back away. They just don't want to go on. They just don't want to face it. So I say to you, Jay, and to everybody here, we are in desperate need of people sitting down at a table and discussing seriously and looking at the diversity and taking everybody into account and how it's going to affect. In the middle, there's always an answer. There is always a solution. There are no problems. There are solutions. And that's what we need to work towards. It's extremely, extremely important. It's very disheartening that I don't see this today. Bothers me tremendously.
My last question is to Jay. Talk a little bit about how you're operating efficiently, and has Rockdale Village taken any steps to improve its carbon footprint?
Sure. So yeah, I'd mentioned in the beginning that we had taken steps about a decade ago to become more efficient in the interest of lessening the burden on our power plant, because we are standalone. So if our plant goes out, our community goes down, and I've got 20,000 people that need air elevators to work, they need the lights on, they need essential services to be there. So running efficiently and redundancy is the name of the game for us. So some of the things we've done is we've upgraded our boiler system. We've rebuilt our turbines. Again, this is 6-year-old tech, but we were able to get efficiencies of a 60% NOx reduction based upon what we've done there, which is essentially 3,600 cars off the road a year. And with that being said, there's still much more to do, and there are future technologies like we talked about hydrogen that's not readily available now, but something I want to set up for, because that changes the whole dynamic of how Rochdale can work. Because we have a cogeneration plant, my boilers spin my turbines. So I can only reduce my load but so much. But once I have hydrogen-powered turbines, I no longer need my boilers to do that. They can just create hot water. And then I can put all the solar I want on 118 acres. So then everything starts to make sense once I come out of that loop. So we're kind of looking forward there, and the things we've done in the past is great. I will say this, I am lucky because I have Speaker Adams in my district. Her office is actually on our property, and she's been really helpful with the problems we're facing now, which is another local law, Local Law 11. So that's a big challenge for us because of the size and scope of our buildings.
If she doesn't listen to you, you could turn off her power.
I guess I could do that, and face the issues that come with that later. So yeah, she's been great for the problems now, and she has been on some of the calls with regard to 97. So I'm happy that some of the council people are listening. But going forward, there really does need to be an assessment, a reassessment of how to get there. I agree with it. The how is
That's
the
all, and nobody disagrees.
Right.
We just want to see it implemented properly.
Correct,
It's
correct.
not being implemented properly.
Right.
That's why the legislation was so easy.
Correct.
To understand, a simple postponement just keep rolling it until we catch up.
yes. There's got to be some reprieve because it's just not realistic at this point in time.
Well, please join me in thanking our second panel. I really appreciate everyone being here and being a part of this. I want to thank National Grid. I want to thank the Queens Chamber of Commerce, and I want to wish everyone here a great day. Thanks so much for being with us.